Bills Mafia. On tonight's Air Raid Hour, we will be discussing key position battles, camp standouts, camp disappointments, and previewing Bills Colts. But first, a little bit of music to set the mood.
Welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen of Bills Mafia, to the Air Raid Hour. And Dave, I'm just going to get right into it this evening. We got 2 training camp practices left, and we are 5 days away from live, albeit preseason football, when the Buffalo Bills take on the Indianapolis Colts at 1 p.m. this Saturday. How does it feel?
August, like I said last show, that was the turning month, right? We were July 31st, our last show, right? And so that month flipping over from July to August, that's when you really start to feel it. This Saturday, it's gonna really feel like we're getting close. And I feel like, a lot of people will say, well, August is gonna kind of go by slowly. It's a while before football starts. And I don't necessarily think that August is gonna go by slowly, but I do think once we hit September, waiting for that first game, knowing that we're on the Monday night game and waiting for that to come around is going to feel like a long weekend, I'm sure, for a lot of people. So it's exciting. We're going to get into the discussion about camp tonight. There's buzz with the team right now. The offense seems to be firing mostly on all cylinders. And I'm really happy that the Bills are kind of going into this season ultimately with a little something to prove, even though they are still one of the best teams in the league. It kind of makes me feel more comfortable, I guess, that they're a little bit more of an underdog, so to speak, than last year, where there was so much pressure on them as the favorites really to win it all. And so I'm excited. I'm excited to see Ken Dorsey in year 2, and I'm excited that Saturday we're going to have some real bullets flying. So it's getting close, and I'm ready for it.
Renaissance Man comes in and said, glad Josh's arm is fine. Every time he gets hit, my heart drops. Put him in bubble wrap, please. So for those of you who didn't see today, Josh Allen actually walked off to the locker room with one of the trainers, was sort of favoring the elbow that he hurt last year, but he was out within a couple of minutes. He was absolutely fine. How do I know he was absolutely fine? Dave, have you seen the highlight clip today of that Josh Allen touchdown pass to Trent Sherfield? The absolute piss missile through 2 defenders, including Teron Johnson and Trey White.
Yeah, I mean, everyone and their mom reposted that one. It would be tough. It would be tough to miss that highlight today. But you know what? Let's throw a little love to Trent Sherfield as well. And I said, pat myself on the back a little bit. Said he was going to have a good camp before camp started, and he's delivering as well. So that was a great play to see. Really, a couple good angles that were captured from that. So, man, that thing was a laser.
Yeah, Trent Sherfield is definitely going to come up on multiple occasions as we talk throughout this evening. But a couple injury updates from camp. Deion Dawkins left practice today, right hand injury. He seems relatively minor. He should be fine, at least by the time the regular season rolls around. Maybe something to keep an eye on. Damian Harris could not finish practice today. He ended practice on the exercise bike. Obviously, soft tissue injuries, running backs, that's something to keep an eye on, something that could be concerning. And then Cam Lewis and Reggie Gilliam both sat out today with groin injuries. All right, before we get to it this evening, once this show is over, or if you are listening on demand, we have a weekly challenge for you this week, and that is to comment on this video with your biggest camp standouts and disappointments, because that's going to be the topic of our show tonight. So whoever you think is having the biggest training camp, whoever sticks out to you the most, let us know in the comment section once this video is over. And if somebody's really disappointing you and you want to get that off your chest, let us know in the comment section as well. And before we get things rolling tonight, this show, as always, is brought to you by Picasso's Pizza. 4 great locations in Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Buffalo Pizza since 1980. You can order online at picassospizza.net. And if you're an out-of-towner like us, you can even get it mailed to your home. And I can tell you from experience, it's just as good as getting it fresh from the restaurant. Again, that is picassospizza.net. It's almost football season, so get your Picassos, get it mailed to you so you can have it ready for week 1 if you're an out-of-towner. And Dave, tonight I want to start with the position battles. And every single week we have been discussing right guard, we have been discussing middle linebacker, and we've been discussing cornerback number 2. I want to throw a new position into the wrinkle today when we talk about position battles, and that is slot receiver. At the blue and red scrimmage, it was mainly Trent Sherfield and Khalil Shakir working out of the slot when the Buffalo Bills went into traditional 11 personnel. Since then, it has mostly been Trent Sherfield and Khalil Shakir working out of the slot when the Buffalo Bills are in traditional 11 personnel. Deontay Hardy, while he has been impressive this training camp, it seems like his packages are more pre-planned packages than he is sort of like an every down slot receiver. What are your thoughts on this Trent Sherfield versus Khalil Shakir battle to be the traditional slot receiver for the Buffalo Bills?
Yeah, and kind of as we just were talking about, I mean, Trent Sherfield, it's been hard to take him off the field, right? He's had a really good camp. We had mentioned in the offseason, going back even to our free agency show, the advanced statistics around Trent Sherfield, his drop rate, one of the lowest in the league. He's got the size. He's played special teams. He came in and really handled himself well playing in the slot and really playing in the shadow of guys like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle last year with the Miami Dolphins outplaying a guy. I know he had injuries but Cedric Wilson, who they gave a ton of money to, the Miami Dolphins outplaying him, albeit with injuries there to Wilson. But Trent Sherfield, coming into this team, signing with this team, and kind of putting himself in a position to really be like an every down slot in the mold that the Bills really haven't had in their slot receivers with Josh Allen, right? It's always been kind of these twitchier guys, whether you go back to Cole Beasley and then you kind of had the Isaiah McKenzie experiment mixed in. Now you have Khalil Shakir in the mix, who is a bit smaller than Sherfield as well. But Trent Sherfield's been the one that's probably been the most consistent. And perhaps if you think about the size mismatches the Bills could create with a guy like Trent Sherfield on the field, and then you add, the size they added with Dalton Kincaid in the draft, the Bills are looking like they could have some size at the skill position group as far as receivers. And Trent Sherfield hasn't really done anything in my mind right now to lose that battle. Obviously, Khalil Shakir is only going into his second year, so still some room for him. And I think the preseason will be important for Khalil Shakir. But as far as your comments and really the situation with Deontay Hardy, I think you're right. In my head, when you were coming to talk about him, like, it was like specialty packages, right? Was what I had thought in my head. And like, that's not such a bad thing, right? And I think that could be a role for Deontay Hardy that he could thrive in. He is a slider guy. And so maybe he's not necessarily equipped to be an every down player, but he's going to play. He's going to play a lot.
And the interesting thing too is I wonder how the Nyheim Hines injury has affected this, right? Deontay Hardy is now the primary punt returner. He also has a pretty long history of injuries. So if you're the Buffalo Bills, maybe Deontay Hardy is now in this specialty package role on offense because you are really trying to save him up for special teams, because you really believe maybe he's really your only viable return man in terms of punt returner and possibly kick returner as well. So it's going to be really interesting to see what maybe the Nyheim Hines injury played a role in that for Deontay Hardy. But at the end of the day, I mean, Sherfield has been the talk of camp. He had the catch of camp today, catching that missile from Josh Allen. He's had multiple touchdowns in the red zone the past few days as well. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this battle shakes out. And you mentioned Khalil Shakir. Preseason is going to be big for him. He had a big preseason last year, and then he was relatively invisible for the most part outside of a few games here or there during the regular season. But Sean McDermott praised Khalil Shakir after the blue and red scrimmage. He said, hey, this guy's the forgotten man. but he just comes in every day. He grinds. He's consistent, and it's starting to show on the field. So Sean McDermott went out of his way to praise Khalil Shakir in his press conference after the blue and red. So I found that to be interesting as well. And we saw it towards the end of last year. You're going to see, and we've seen it since Brian Dable ran this offense. There's always going to be a heavy rotation of wide receivers. So Khalil Shakir, Trent Sherfield, Deontay Hardy, they're all going to get their shots, and they're all going to get chances this season to be successful. But I wouldn't be surprised, as you said, if Sherfield sort of separates himself from this pack of three.
Yeah, and I mean it's not a bad situation to have, right? Because all three of those guys bring something a little different, and that's a good thing I think in this scenario, right? Because you have situations where depending on what you want to do, how you want to attack the defense, what team you're playing, maybe what time in the game, what the situation is in the game, you can kind of mix and match, bring different guys in. So certainly not a bad problem to have if you're the Bills.
Looking now at right guard, obviously things can change over the course of the preseason when the live action starts. But right now, I think in terms of the right guard battle, I'm leaning a little bit towards Ryan Bates being the week one starter. Osiris Torrance, by all reports, has been great run blocking, but has struggled, as a lot of rookies and young players do, in pass protection. So Ryan Bates thus far, he's been more consistent, but he's also been working at center because the Buffalo Bills want to have a plan there in case Mitch Morse gets hurt. And it seems like the Bills wanting to get Bates work at center has sort of helped Osiris Torrance get more valuable reps with the first team offense. But maybe it's not an indicator that he's close to winning that job, because it does seem like Ryan Bates has been more consistent. What are your thoughts on this right guard battle?
Yeah, I mean, obviously last week, we kicked off camp, or even the show before, we were saying like we really were kind of hoping that it would be Osiris Torrance at the end of camp, and really headed into the regular season as the starter. And I'm with you. I think as it stands right now, that's probably not the case. There's still time. Obviously, we've got 3 preseason games. We've got more practices ahead, obviously, but it certainly sounds like Ryan Bates has been the more consistent player thus far. Joe B had a really good article on The Athletic kind of detailing the ups and downs of Osiris Torrance's camp so far. And as you said, noting the real strengths that he's seen when the Bills have gone with the run more so than the pass, and in situations where he's been beat in pass protection by guys like Daquan Jones and others, he struggled at times, which, I mean, look, that's not a surprise to me, right? His game in college was a run blocking guard, right? Like that was his strength. And so that's to be expected, that starting his first year in the NFL and his first training camp, that he's probably going to look much better run blocking than he is pass blocking. But in some of those plays where he was in pass protection, Josh Allen had to get rid of the ball, or it would have been a would-be sack, or whatever it may be. The Bills aren't going to be happy with that when it comes to real game action. So still time for him, but you're right. I think as of right now, Bates probably the leader in that battle.
And Pops Mafia came in with a great comment. He said Torrance will probably take over at some point, especially when Bates needs to move somewhere due to an injury. Because, and again, we had this conversation a few weeks ago. Does Ryan Bates' versatility actually work against him? The Buffalo Bills would rather have him on the bench so he's healthy in case Mitch Morse gets hurt, and not have to shuffle guys around by moving Bates to center and then Torrance to right guard, and essentially swapping 2 positions instead of just swapping 1 if Bates is ready to come off the bench and be plug and play. But at the end of the day, too, this might sound silly, right? And, Joe Marino and some other people brought up like, oh, well, the Buffalo Bills could play matchups this year with middle linebacker, and could be Dotson one week and Bernard next week, depending on the matchup. Oh, the Bills could play matchups this year with CB2, and it could be Kyrie Elam one week, and it could be Dane Jackson the next week. I don't know. Can you play matchups with right guard? Because by all accounts, Osiris Torrance has been a very, very good run blocker thus far through training camp. Is he a guy you bring in on the goal line? Like, is he a guy you bring in short yardage situations? I'm not going to lie. I don't know the nuances of professional football enough to know if that's something that teams have traditionally done, because you're really tipping your hand when you put Osiris Torrance out there that you're probably going to be run blocking. And you also come into situations where, what if there's a weather game in November or December again? Obviously, we all hope that Osiris Torrance is the starter by then. But if you get like another historic wind game or a snow game, a guy like Osiris Torrance might be a guy that, if he's not a starter by then, you might want to start then, because you know he's that road gate grader in the running game. So again, I'm not going to pretend to know the nuances of the professional football game enough to know if you can do this with the right guard position. But if the Bills are maybe considering it at corner and they're considering matchups at middle linebacker, maybe they really are considering that at right guard as well.
I think it would have to be reserved to very, very specific and sort of non-frequent situations. Because otherwise, like you just mentioned, and as I was thinking while you were talking, like you're tipping your hand, right?
Yeah.
So unless you're at the goal line and you have no, like, outside of maybe a Josh Allen bootleg where like the pass protection is really not something that you're needing down at the goal line, like at the 1 yard line, and right, or something like that, it would be really hard for me to see the Bills going with that kind of strategy, right? Because not only that, right, it could affect the guys next to him as well, right? Then all of a sudden, like Mitch Morse has to, maybe worry about who's on his right side, and then maybe Spencer Brown has to worry like a little bit more about like who's next to him. So I think it has a bigger effect than just that position potentially. And I think, yes, in certain situations, maybe very infrequent situations, it could work. But let's just hope he will naturally kind of progress, and eventually that becomes a moot point.
Let's transition now to middle linebacker. And this position is getting very, very interesting. And it appears to be down to two players, Tyrel Dodson, Terrell Bernard. Dodson started the blue-red scrimmage. Bernard was the starter at weak side linebacker for Matt Milano, who was out with an injury. But then Bernard came in with the second team at middle linebacker. They've essentially been rotating every practice. Balon Spector, AJ Klein, they're now out of the rotation. It has been Dodson one day, Bernard the next day. Terrell Bernard has been impressive, and he's the guy that I would want selfishly to win this position battle. Sean McDermott, Bobby Babich, they both praised Terrell Bernard's work in their press conferences today, albeit I've only seen clips, so I don't know what the setup was, whether they were asked about Bernard or they brought him up sort of on their own. But you mentioned this, and other people have mentioned this before as well. The biggest issue you run into with Terrell Bernard is, and you can just tell when you line up Dorian Williams, Terrell Bernard, Tyrel Dodson, Balon Spector, when you line those 4 or 5 guys up, it's pretty obvious which one Terrell Bernard is, because he is by far the smallest, the leanest. He practically looks like a safety. So that's where I'm at right now in my struggle with this middle linebacker competition. But where are you right now with Tyrel Dodson versus Terrell Bernard?
Yeah, I probably lean with you, right? Like I would want it to be Bernard. I haven't been overly impressed with Dotson's play in the past, but as Pops Mafia says here, Dotson has looked better in coverage this year than he has in the past. And that's all well and good. And that would be obviously a welcome improvement to Tyrell Dotson's game, and probably why he's getting first crack right now, because he does have the size that Bernard doesn't have. But I wonder how much it's really going to show when it comes to real action, right? Tyrell Dodson has played a lot of defensive snaps for this team over the past couple years. To me, he has the lowest ceiling of any of versus him or Terrell Bernard athletically. And because like Balon Spector, is kind of out of the mix at the moment. But Tyrell Dodson's going to have to show that he can play some coverage, right? Because for all those people that hated on Tremaine Edmonds for some of his, at times, lapses in pass coverage, or what they thought to be lapses, Dodson really has to prove it, as Roy says. And so that's where I'm at. He has to prove it when the game really starts, not just in practice, in the pass coverage. And that's not to say that Terrell Bernard is going to be spectacular in pass coverage either, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I think when you have the sort of known versus the unknown, you kind of tend to want to lean towards the unknown because it could be a higher ceiling.
And it's really interesting too, because Bobby Babich brought up Dorian Williams today, and he was talking about Dorian Williams and how he was the backup to Matt Milano right now, and he really isn't in contention to start. And his major comment was, it's like, listen, We know what Dorian Williams is physically. That's why we drafted him. It's the mental aspect of the game, being able to play fast because you know what you're doing mentally. That is what Dorian Williams needs to work on and get comfortable with. And that's where Terrell Bernard needs to be right now, or should be right now. And from everything we're hearing, Terrell Bernard is having an excellent camp. So a lot of us were upset with who the Bills drafted last year in the third round. We were upset with the fact that he couldn't get on the field last season. We were upset with the fact that, he's not traditionally someone who fits into that Mike linebacker position. But if Terrell Bernard gets out there on the field this year and excels, that not only gives you a lot of hope for Brandon Beane and his ability to draft linebackers in the third round, it also gives you some hope for Dorian Williams coming in the future as well.
That's true. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, again, the biggest issue is size. If Matt Milano was the one who walked and Tremaine Edmonds was here, I would be super excited about the idea of Terrell Bernard at weak side linebacker. So it's going to be really interesting to see what Sean McDermott has cooked up. Because remember, Sean McDermott said he wants the middle linebacker to have the green dot. So I think it's going to be very difficult for the Buffalo Bills to play matchups this year if they're subbing in and out Tyrell Dotson, Terrell Bernard, Tyrell Dotson, Terrell Bernard, because that means someone else is going to have the dot. I don't think you can have Tyrell Dotson have the green dot or Terrell Bernard have the green dot if they're consistently coming off the football field.
And I agree. And I think, like, I know the personnel is much different this year than it had been in the past when you had Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano, and those guys never came off the field, right? The Bills and their sort of base defense play that two linebacker, and those guys never came off the field as a duo. And yes, it's different personnel this year, but I still think there is something to being into a rhythm, even on the defensive side of the ball, right? And having the play snap after snap and having the same guy calling out the plays and getting comfortable in those situations. So I would lean with you. And I don't think it, like, maybe there's situations where they're both on the field at the same time, but like, I don't think you can be swapping in and out necessarily, especially with the green dot situation. So that's probably like an under the radar, maybe like aspect or factor of this whole middle linebacker battle, is this whole comment Sean McDermott made around he wants that guy to have the green dot. Ultimately, he may not get his wish there if it becomes that. But it would probably, you'd probably lean towards Dotson again in that regard, just given the experience.
Especially too, and again, we'll see how this all plays out, but it'll be really interesting to see if he gives the green dot to one of those two guys, because as Pops Mafia chimes in, Taylor Rapp's going to play too. And Saran Neal is going to play, because by all accounts, Saran Neal is having his best training camp to date. The Bills are going to be in thick dime a lot. And when they're in thick dime, it's not Matt Milano that's coming off the field. It's going to be one of Tyrell Dotson or Terrell Bernard. So super interesting to see how that all plays out, and, what happens over the course of the preseason and then entering week one. Cornerback 2. Dane Jackson started camp strong, looked like he was going to hold his position. Then Kyer Elam slowly worked his way in. He was impressive. We all were getting excited. Maybe Kyer Elam is going to win this job. He's going to take a stranglehold, or at least it'll be some kind of rotation that might heavily lean towards Kyer Elam. And then Christian Bedford decides he wants to get back in the game. He's been getting first team reps. He's been rotating in. He's had 3 interceptions over the past 2 days. So what looked like it was a 2-man battle between Dane Jackson and Kyer Elam that maybe Kyer Elam could win, Christian Benford has now entered the chat as well to once again make this a 3-way battle for CB2. This has to be the most frustrating thing as a Bills fan, because on one end of the spectrum, you are happy because we have 3 solid options at CB2. And if one guy gets hurt, there are 2 other guys who could step in. But on the other hand, we all know who we want to win this training camp battle. And it's frustrating that he hasn't run away with it.
I mean, it reminds me of situations we had with Levi Wallace in the past, right? Where he just like wouldn't give up that CB2 job. He was like not necessarily the most physically gifted guy, but he was always in the, mostly in the right position. And he was hard to take off the field. And again, guy ended up starting 30 plus games for the Bills over those, 3-4 seasons. And so Dane Jackson's trying to kind of make his claim to that as well. And by all accounts, he's probably going to come up in the camp standouts
Mhm.
section of this show as well. So this is going to be really interesting to see what happens in preseason with this, right? I'm right now before playing a preseason game, am definitely more of the mindset of
Mhm.
I'm going to take the perspective of we have 3 really good options right now, albeit yes, I want Kyrie Irving to be the guy at the end of this, but the
Mhm.
fact that all 3 guys by all accounts have been playing really well, especially Dane Jackson and then now Christian Benford of late. It's night and day from where we were with this cornerback group 2 years ago. So
Mhm.
I'll take it as a positive, and ultimately, let's see what Kyrie Irving can do before week 1.
And a great comment from Pops Mouth. He says, "Will Trey White take less snaps this season, possibly in the regular season, to make sure he's healthy at the end of the year?" And the Bills certainly have the horses to do that right now with Kyrie Elam and Dane Jackson and Christian Benford. They could take Trey White off the field. All indications though from camp thus far is he's ready to go. He's
Mhm.
100%. He's probably not going to be on any kind of pitch count. All right. So let's move on now to our second topic of the evening, and that is going to be training camp standouts. Players that have really stood out to us. And essentially, what we're going to do here is we're just going to go back and forth. I'm going to say, Dave, who is a camp standout that you can think of? Then we'll kick it back to me and we'll go back and forth until we just run out of guys who have stood out at training camp. And feel free in the comment section to just chime in with people who have stood out to you, and maybe we can start with Pops Mafia here because let's just get out of the way, right? Let
Yes,
Dalton
gotta
Dalton
be number 1 on
Kincaid.
the list, right? Yeah.
So here's the hype trade, right? Like we're getting to the point now where if you were to rank the Bills' top 4 fantasy players, it would be Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen would be your top 2, and then it would be Gabriel Davis would probably be your third, you would think, third option if you were to draft for the Buffalo Bills player in fantasy football. There are some people fantasy football people out there who are standing on tables and saying Dalton Kincaid will be the third best Buffalo Bills player in fantasy this year. That's how confident they're feeling. This guy's dropped what, one pass all of
Mhm.
training camp. I mean, he's been absolutely incredible. He's getting the confidence of Josh Allen. So let's just talk about Dalton Kincaid a little bit.
The hype train is real. He's been incredible, on overshadowing Dawson Knox a bit, even though Dawson
Yeah.
Knox has had a good camp by all accounts as well. Um, I personally, for Dalton Kincaid, like I am
Mhm.
not going to I'm not gonna try to hold him to unreasonable expectations when the real games start, right? He has been great in camp, there's no doubt about it. But like if people all of a sudden think he's gonna catch 90 balls and have
Mhm.
1,000 receiving yards and 10 touch, like that's not gonna happen. All right. I mean, I shouldn't say it's not, but it's like very, very unlikely that that's going to happen. So um, my expectation is that he will, based on how camp has gone, be an early contributor and should be a contributor all season. So I guess the way I would look at it is I don't think we're going to have to wait too long, even though Dalton
Mhm.
Kincaid's a rookie, to see what his impact is going to be on this Bills offense. And I think given the track record of how things have panned out in previous seasons for skill position players that are young. We saw with James Cook last year as a rookie. Um, and we've seen it with guys like Khalil
Mhm.
Shakir last year's rookie. I don't think you're going to have to wait too long to see that with Dalton Kincaid. And so I'm excited. One of the big sort of questions I wonder about is like, how do you manage his preseason reps, right? Because he's
Mhm.
obviously a rookie. He does need some game reps, I think, in the preseason, but you also don't necessarily want to put him out there for too long. So that's an interesting, I think, debate to have is like how much should Dalton Kincaid play in the preseason as a rookie? You're having that conversation. And yeah, he is probably, based on the fact that he's a rookie, probably the number 1 standout, right? Obviously, Josh and Diggs in that as well. But
Mhm.
given that he's a rookie, given it's a position that historically has not been great statistically to tight ends their rookie seasons throughout the history of the NFL, I mean, it's a great story. And
Yeah.
it's really welcome, especially given that how many people wanted the Bills to draft a wide receiver and they ended up drafting
Mhm.
Dalton Kincaid.
Roy Collins comes in with the over under 450 yards receiving this season. Where would you land on that over under?
I think it's a good number. I think it's a fair number.
Mhm.
I mean, you look at Dawson Knox. I don't have his stats in front of me, but Dawson Knox couldn't have had much more than 500 yards last year. I don't have the numbers in front of me. So, I
Mhm.
mean, I let's see. I just look at Dawson Knox really good. Dawson Knox 388 as a rookie, 288, 587, 517. I'll take the under. And people are gonna hate me for that, but I'll take the under 450.
I'll take the over because I like it when people like me. So I'm gonna take the
Yeah.
over. Uh Speaking of Dalton Kincaid, though, I think getting overshadowed a little bit is the training camp that Gabriel Davis is having. He has come out and
Mhm.
he's had himself a very good training camp. He has slimmed down. He is healthier. He's running a more nuanced route tree. So all of those things are really interesting. So between Dalton Kincaid and sort of a Gabriel Davis 2.0, it's going to be really exciting to see this Buffalo Bills offense week one and how they can get the balls into these guys' hands. But what are your thoughts on Gabriel Davis?
I mean, we talked about him a lot on the last show, right? It's clear he's ready to play, whether he gets this contract or not before the season starts.
Mhm.
Obviously, there hasn't been a ton of rumblings recently on that front, but he's certainly making the case and kind of maybe forcing the Bills' hand a bit for them to consider, do we need to sign this guy to, maybe like a three-ish type year deal before the season starts and kind of lock him up before his value might be to the point where it
Mhm.
becomes a Tremaine Edmonds situation and the Bills have no choice but to let him walk in 2024. I think the situation with Dalton Kincaid may also play a factor in sort of what the Bills feel about Gabriel Davis. If they feel like they've got a stud in Kincaid to pair with Diggs,
Mhm.
that could be interesting as well. But look, um, my personal if the Bills could find a way to get this man a contract before the season, and I know Greg, he knows the cap better than almost anybody. I'm sure there's a way that the Bills could figure this out. Um, with the salary cap considerations, like I would personally try to get him a contract before the season, and
Mhm.
that way you have Diggs locked up, Davis locked up, Kincaid on his rookie contract, and Knox locked up. And that's a group of four that you could really
Mhm.
build around. Not to mention, you still have James Cook on his rookie contract. So that seems to me like a really solid core of guys to have for the next 2, 3, 4-year stretch.
Mhm.
If you could find a way to get Gabe locked up before the season.
Speaking of wide receivers, I want to give three guys a shout out that maybe aren't people that typically get shout outs or that we really talk about on this show because probably none of these guys are going to make the roster. But from all accounts, Andy Isabella is having a solid camp. Keyshawn Johnson is having a really solid camp. And Tyrell Shavers is having a solid camp as well. I've seen those three names pop up in the various different articles from all the beat reporters who are at training camp. And Joe B brought up an interesting thing in his article today for the Athletic. Keyshawn Johnson, and Andy and Isabella are both veterans, meaning you could only have 6 veterans on the practice squad. So the Buffalo Bills are probably not going to want to put 2 veteran receivers on the practice squad in Andy Isabella and Keyshawn Johnson. So it really could come down to Keyshawn Johnson versus Andy Isabella for a practice squad spot. And then Tyrell Shavers, and the Bills like him. They gave him a multi-year contract as a UDFA. They really like him as a gunner. Tyrell Shavers would likely slot into the other practice squad spot. Keyshawn Johnson is probably having a probably better training camp than Andy Isabella, but he's similar to Tyrell Shavers. So if the Buffalo Bills are looking for 2 different types of wide receivers, it could be Shavers and Isabella who make the Buffalo Bills practice squad. But these depth wide receivers, Isabella, Johnson, Shavers, and we're not even talking about guys like Justin Shorter, Des Patman. It's going to be an interesting preseason.
It'll be an interesting preseason for them. And I think, Isabella obviously gunning for one of those veteran practice squad spots. And Pop says
Mhm.
Marcel Aitman is some nice catches too. I think you'll see a mix on the practice squad of maybe like a guy like Isabella plus a younger guy, like just have a
Mhm.
nice mix, like one veteran, one younger guy. But yeah, the wide receivers have been playing well. I think that preseason will be important for not saying that these guys are going to make the team because I don't think they will, but which
Mhm.
guys make the practice squad and which guys the Bills really want to try to make an effort to keep for the chance of a potential call up maybe when needed during the season or just for the development. So AK Cash says it's cool to me. Andy Isabella, Marcel Eamon, Jay Sternberger, depth pass catchers, all hard ballers. Yeah, and we were big Jay Sternberger fans on this show in the pre-draft process. So it is cool to see him coming kind of full circle to where we like to see him. So yeah.
Speaking of Jace, again, he could be having a good camp, and by all accounts, he hasn't shown up in a negative light. But I've been hearing a lot of positive things about Quentin Morris as well. So that gives the Buffalo Bills even more depth at that tight end spot, because Quentin Morris, along with Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid, gives the Buffalo Bills a lot of options there at tight end, with a guy like Jay Sternberger who could make the practice squad quite possibly and really give you four options there. All right, Dave, who are some other camp standouts to you, maybe outside of the pass catcher?
Yeah, I mean, if we want to kind of stick with the offense, I think we got to mention James Cook, right? I
100%.
mean, I think when you were saying Bills fantasy players, I thought you were going to say James Cook number 3 potentially as an option, and I
I'd
think
buy it. That would be my prediction. Actually, I would have Davis and then Cook, but
I'm going to be looking to go after James Cook in a lot of my fantasy
Mhm.
drafts coming up here in the next couple weeks, because one, I just can't help myself, and two, man, how nice is that going to be if he kind of goes off this year? And like, I don't think he's having a great camp, right? But I don't think he's going to all of a sudden now, because he's having a great camp, be this guy that gets 300 carries. Like, that's not what I'm saying. But I think he's going to be really efficient with his touches. I think he's going to be really more involved in the passing game than we've maybe seen from any of the Bills running backs the past couple of years, just because they maybe didn't have the personnel for it, right? Devin
Mhm.
Singletary, Zach Moss, okay pass catchers, right, in their own right, but they're not James Cook. So Ken Dorsey, again, going into year 2 as a play caller, kind of showing some evolution there and showing some growth there, and seeing some of these highlights of James Cook being involved in the passing game really has me excited for what he can bring to the table. And by all accounts, he's having a really, really good camp. So super excited for that. And yeah, I think you got to mention James Cook as a camp standout.
I mean, 100%. The only question now is, once the regular season hits, what kind of load can James Cook carry? Can he handle being, I don't want to say a bell cow back, because I don't think he'll be a bell cow back, but maybe a mini bell cow, like maybe his own sort of version of a bell cow, being a guy who he needs to be good in pass pro. All indications are he's been solid in pass pro all training camp. Need to see that in the preseason. He's obviously been a beast in the passing game. He showed more patience as a runner. The only question now is can his body handle that workload? And we'll see that over the course of the season. And I want to throw these other two guys out there in terms of camp standouts, Latavius Murray and Damian Harris, because we might not have heard about them like blowing up camp the way James Cook or Gabriel Davis has. But what I have heard and what I have seen reports of is that in short yardage situations, when Latavius Murray gets the football, he's money. He's
And he's second
picking up
team right now with
and
Harris's
he's
injury.
he's picking up the first downs. So that's what I like to hear. And Damian Harris has popped off a couple of solid runs. So I feel really good about the Buffalo Bills backfield, because even if James
Yep.
Cook can't be a bell cow or a mini bell cow, you still have, I think, even if they're not going to blow the doors off of you, you still have two pretty solid running backs and Latavius Murray and Damian Harris behind him. So even without Naheem Hines, feeling really comfortable about the Buffalo Bills running back room. I don't think we can go any longer. We're talking about camp standouts without talking about maybe the most talked about name, I think, right now on the defensive side of the football, and that is the emergence of AJ Epinesa. He is having, by all accounts, a huge training camp. He's giving Deion Dawkins fits. Sean McDermott talks about how important AJ Epinesa is going to be until Von Miller can return. Coaches are singing his praises. He's showing up on the stat sheet. He's showing up in the beat reporter articles. It'll be interesting to see how much run he even gets in the preseason, but by all accounts, things might have clicked for AJ Epinesa.
And what a huge lift this would be for the Bills defensive line if that is the case and when the real games start, right? You have Von Miller very close, what it seems like, to returning. I know he's still on the pup
Mhm.
list, but you add that to the mix with Leonard Floyd, who's also been having, being put in good positions from this defensive coaching staff by his own, his own admission to where they're lining him up and what they're letting him do, just rush the passer. If AJ Epinesa can be that early down, that early down compliment to Gregory Rousseau in the instance where Von Miller isn't ready to start the season, the Bills all of a sudden now have this super deep rotation, and a guy like Epinesa kind of hitting his
Mhm.
stride this year is only going to be good for him, right? Because
Yeah.
he's coming up into a situation where he's going to want that next contract. So I'm really happy for AJ Epinesa. Um, I've always been kind of like a little bit middling on him on this show, admittedly.
Yeah.
But I will certainly root for the guy and will be very
Mhm.
happy if he has a strong season. And I'll certainly be cheering him on, no doubt about it. So, yeah, AJ Epinesa
He
becoming
calling
Aaron
his
Jones.
shot, AK Cash right now.
That's Aaron Jones, maybe one of the more under heralded Bills of his time,
Yeah.
but that's some high praise.
That is some high praise from AK Cash right there. And yeah, it's gonna here's my biggest beef with AJ Epinesa is you're supposed to you want to draft a guy like AJ Epinesa and you want him to come in and you want him to contribute and you want him to be as good as he's been this training camp for the whole 4 years of his rookie deal, or at least 3 of the 4 years of his rookie deal, right? Now you're possibly going to get him for one good year. I guess last year you could consider a good year, but maybe one great year, possibly if he has a great year, right? On
Mhm.
his rookie deal. And then you're going to have to pay the man and you have to make the decision whether you want to pay him or not. And if you don't want to pay him because you weren't sure whether he was just doing it for the bag, well, then you're out of what you invested a second round pick and you really only got 1 year, maybe 2 years of production out of him. So that's the really difficult thing. And that's what where I'm torn with AJ Epinesa. But I mean, we could sit here for an hour and we could name individual players, right? But how about we just pivot to this? The defensive line as a unit, from
Mm.
everything we have heard from beat reporters, from coaches, from national media who has visited training camp, from fans in the stands who have been tweeting, is that this defensive line is just been absolutely incredible, and that they are just imposing their will upon the Buffalo Bills offensive line. They are giving the Buffalo Bills offense fits, and that this is a much more aggressive defensive line. And this is a hella deep defensive line, like practically 3 deep at some positions here. What are your thoughts on just the defensive line as a whole being this is probably the biggest standout of training camp to me is just the defensive line.
And the Bills have been trying to get this right for a couple of years, right? We've talked about this a lot
Mhm.
and on various different shows, and you just start to go up and down the list, and you start thinking about each individual sort of storyline and how that kind of builds to the collective, right? And you've got Von Miller coming back from injury. You've got Tim Settle improving by a lot
Mhm.
of the reports. You've got AJ Vanessa obviously having a good camp. You've had mentions of guys like Ed Oliver at times having what looks to be really strong performances. Obviously, you know we're going to get from Daquan. Jordan Phillips is now back, albeit not practicing in team drills yet, but he's back off the injury list as well. And we haven't even talked about Gregory Rousseau either, who's had standout on top of like the Bills coaching staff really putting guys like Leonard Floyd, like I mentioned, in position where he can do his best work, rushing the pass. Like this can be a really, really good unit, and it's deep. And I think the Bills kind of learned their lesson. Like, we really need to shore up this unit because this unit's going to not necessarily make or break us, but it could take us to the promised land if they perform. When you start to talk about what this side of the ball could be to in, you know, like in complement to what the offense can be. Like this is a team that when you look at it, they're not the favorites to win the Super Bowl, but if that defensive line um is
Mhm.
up to like the hype, the Bills could legitimately have the best offense in the NFL and possibly the best defense in the NFL this year, which is crazy to think about, you
Yeah.
know, for a team that's paying their quarterback this much, right? So, um,
I mean, every
it,
single player up and down this defensive line. Gregory Rousseau has been getting a ton of shine. People are starting to say like maybe his ceiling's higher than we thought. There are people that are mentioning like him and Mario Williams in the same sentence. So Groot is getting crazy hype. Ed Oliver has been talked about in a positive manner. Daquan Jones, nothing but positives. Puna Ford, nothing but positives. Leonard Floyd talked about how he loves this defense because he can attack. He didn't like how last year in LA in that 34 defense, he was asked to drop back. You have him, you have Epinesa. Boogie Basham is getting looks inside and outside, and he's getting talked about a lot. And then no one's even talking about Shaq Lawson. And from what I read from Matt Perino the other day, Shaq Lawson's been out there a lot with the ones, both inside and outside. So again, you're seeing guys like Boogie, you're seeing guys like Groot, you're seeing guys like Shaq Lawson all getting reps, not only on the exterior, but on the interior as well, which is again another sign that maybe the Buffalo Bills defense is going to get more aggressive. It's going to get to the point where like it's going to be really tough to cut somebody.
Yep.
When cut downs come. And then on top of that, apparently Shane Ray is having a really good training camp as well. So he's going to be one of the guys to keep an eye out for in this preseason, because there's no shot really for Shane Ray, poor guy, I think, to make this roster, but he certainly is somebody who will be really interesting if we can get him on the practice squad.
Well, yeah, and of course he was sitting out there, and obviously a chance for him to come back to the NFL. Like, I don't think Shane Ray on the practice squad is a failure on his part, right? I think that's probably a successful story for him this year if he makes the practice squad. But man, this unit is deep, and I can't wait to see him against Aaron Rodgers in week 1, man. It's going to be great.
AK Cash comes in and says, I don't see how you can cut bait with Basham. He's too valuable on a rookie contract. Can't disagree with that comment right there. Tony, the Chevy guy, comes in and says, keep one QB and 11 D linemen. We're going to talk about quarterbacks in a moment when we talk about camp disappointments, but any other players stick out to you as camp standouts? We've pretty much gone through everything but the secondary to this point.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously this segment of the show is going to be much longer than the next one because there really haven't been a ton of disappointment. But let me give a little bit of shine to Trey White, right? I think that, like you said, he looks like he's back. He's that kind of back to that fun-loving sort of attitude that you expect from him when he's kind of on the top of his game. That's kind of this type of guy he is. That's the style of player he is, and you see him with you see him with the coaching staff's son and like helping him out, and like just reports of him having pass breakup after pass breakup and getting in the mix, and like this is against like Stephon Diggs and the like it is really positive to hear about how well Trey White's doing in camp. And so just want to give him a quick little shout out before we move on here, because I feel like he's kind of a little bit of a forgotten man, maybe a little bit during all this camp talk of like Kincaid and Davis and others.
Nothing but positives with Trey White, nothing but positives with Teron Johnson, nothing but positives with Jordan Poyer. So really, those three guys are going to be the leaders in the secondary. We'll talk about Micah Hyde in a little bit. And Matt Galliford comes in and says, how about those safeties though? Huge difference when we have Hyde, Poyer, and Rapp. And that's another camp standout, is maybe not so much the play of Taylor Rapp, but the fact that the Buffalo Bills are going thick dime. The Bills have Taylor Rapp and Sarandon on the field. The Bills are going 3 safety a ton. You're seeing a lot of new looks from this Buffalo Bills defense, and guys like Taylor Rapp and guys like Saran Neal have had a chance to really shine throughout training camp, and it'll be interesting to see how that works in the preseason if they get an opportunity to do that there as well.
Yeah, and I think again, these signings that the Bills made, sort of, we'll call it later in free agency, Taylor Rapp, Leonard Floyd, like these guys with experience, solid players, man. It probably doesn't get talked about enough, the job Brandon Beane did this offseason with the cap situation he was in. Like, honestly, I think for my money, the best offseason Brandon Beane's had, given all the circumstances around the cap that he had to deal with. I'll give him so much credit.
And I always want to shout out my UB guys. I know that he is injured right now with a groin injury, but all accounts, Cam Lewis is having another big training camp, and he's really making a lot of beat reporters think, like, do the Buffalo Bills keep 11 DBs? I really hope the Bills don't keep 11 DBs. As much as I love Cam Lewis, I would love to maybe have him as the veteran on the practice squad, because this defensive line is loaded. This offensive line is loaded. I would rather, or not loaded, but I would rather go heavy at offensive line and continue to develop guys. I don't want to say the offensive line is loaded because we're about to get to the offensive line, but I'd rather go heavy on the lines and reserve those practice squad spots for the Alex Austins, the Cam Lewises of the world, fit AJ Klein or Traven Howard on the practice squad, go shallower at linebacker. So all of those things will be interesting conversations to have as we get towards cut down day as well. But always want to give a shout out to Cam Lewis, my guy from the University of Buffalo. All right, on now to camp disappointments. And again, you mentioned there's not that many things to be disappointed about in camp thus far. There are two big ones that stick out to me. Let's start with maybe the one that's less concerning and build our way up to the one that's more concerning. Backup quarterback. So from all accounts, Kyle Allen has not looked great. Sean McDermott came to his defense today during a press conference, said, listen, it's his first year. He's learning the playbook. He's trying to pick everything up, et cetera, et cetera. You know, he's played games in this league. He's had success in this league. Matt Barkley is obviously a veteran in this league. What are your thoughts on the backup quarterback situation? And should the Buffalo Bills be content with who they have on the roster there?
Probably too early to tell. I think the Bills really want to get a look at Kyle Allen in the preseason, see how he fares. I think last year, obviously, the Bills were in a pretty comfortable situation with Case Keenum being the backup. Obviously, has played a ton of games, has had success in the league. So it's definitely a different situation where you have Kyle Allen this year, who's maybe a little bit more physically gifted than a guy like Case Keenum, but certainly doesn't have the experience, the amount of experience a guy like Keenum had, or even really a ton of winning experience at all. So yes, new team, new playbook. Preseason is going to be important for Kyle Allen. Obviously, we saw earlier today the Lions scooped up one of the quarterbacks on the market in Teddy Bridgewater that a lot of Bills fans would have been probably happy to kind of maybe swap out for Kyle Allen. But at the end of the day, Kyle Allen has been in camp. He's the one that probably knows the playbook more than any of these other guys that they could bring in at this juncture. So I think the Bills will probably do the thing and give him the shot in the preseason, right? Unless he falls completely flat on his face in the preseason, he's probably going to be your backup quarterback. So, although a disappointment, the fact is if anything happens to Josh Allen, the season's fucked anyway, right? Like, I mean, so it's just, I think it's about maybe, I think it's about.
Sorry. What Pos Mafia comes with a great comment. He says it took a couple preseason games before Keenum looked all that good on the offense last year. And you bring up a good point, right? If Josh Allen has done so for the year, the season's over. We're cooked, whatever. But at the same time, my biggest beef with that is this. Say Josh Allen misses a month. He misses 4 games.
Yep.
If we go 0-4 in those 4 games because Kyle Allen and Matt Barkley aren't worth a damn, our season is over.
Yes.
But if we had a backup quarterback who's capable of going 2-2 in those games, we still have a fighting chance once Josh Allen returns. So everyone wants to talk about how we're screwed when Josh Allen is gone. I'm not thinking so much for the season, because if he's gone for the season, knock on wood, hopefully it doesn't happen, we're screwed. But if he misses a month or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I want a guy who can maybe go 500 in that time period and help us, help keep us in the mix for when Josh Allen does return. But on the other hand, this offense is so Josh Allen centric that I don't even know if there is anybody who could come in and even remotely run the Buffalo Bills offense as created and as tailored for Josh Allen. And it's going to be really difficult to put an offense together on the fly catered to a quarterback that's not Josh Allen. So I don't even know where my head is with this whole backup quarterback situation. I guess you might as well just keep Kyle Allen and Matt Barkley at this point.
Keep Kyle Allen and try to give him some layups, give the ball to James Cook a bunch in those games. Maybe you have a James Cook, Latavius Murray heavy dose in those games and try to let your defense kind of carry you. And I think it depends too, like what stretch of the season you're in, right? If you're going into that gauntlet where you're playing like the Eagles, Chiefs, whatever, like you're probably not going to win with whoever the backup QB is anyway, right? So I don't want to even think about it, but you're right. I mean, you can get a guy to kind of survive 3 weeks, even if it's like 1-2. If you don't go 0-3, that could be the difference between, possibly even winning the division, I'll say. But I don't even want to put that in the universe.
The names out there, if the Buffalo Bills were to pursue a backup quarterback: Carson Wentz, Nick Foles, Joe Flacco. So it's not even like there's very many options out there on the street.
Hey, you love Joe Flacco.
I do like Joe Flacco, but here's my issue with both Joe Flacco and I'll even say like I really do hope Kyle Allen comes out in the preseason and looks sharp and looks good because I love Matt Barkley, love the dude, love the player, but at this point in his career, you watch Matt Barkley play, he's an absolute statue back there. At least Kyle
Mhm.
Allen can get him move around a little bit, right? Like make some things happen with his legs. Matt Barkley literally just stands there and just lofts the ball up. Like that's what he does in the preseason. So I just don't know what you're going to get with Matt Barkley at quarterback. So I really do hope Kyle Allen separates himself a little bit over the next month. So he's the dude. The biggest concern right now, and this is who knows how much of a concern it is really. And this is what we're going to be looking for in the preseason game against the Colts. If
Mm.
the Colts starting defensive line plays, the Buffalo Bills offensive line, by all accounts, confusion, letting guys by, defensive line has been tearing them to shreds, bad communication, poor pass protection, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There have not been glowing reviews of anyone on the Buffalo Bills offensive line. Even the veterans like Deion Dawkins are getting beat by guys like AJ Epinesa. So is it time to worry as a Buffalo Bills fan, or is our defensive line just that good?
I think you start to kind of like rewind this a bit and you go back to where the Bills' defensive line was at this time last year. The similar reports, right, coming out about how the defensive line was just stealing the show at training
Mhm,
camp. And that was with Von Miller, albeit, right? But again, still a really good group. The Bills did improve their offensive line, but they're obviously rotating at some of these positions, especially right guard. So it's not it's not a huge surprise to me that the defensive line is kind of getting the better of this offensive line because at the end of the day, like this defensive line is better than the Bills' offensive line. If you talk about
mhm,
line to line comparisons, right? They are better. This defensive line should be getting the better of this Bills' offensive line. Yes, the Bills look like they've improved their offensive line on paper by bringing guys like Connor McGovern and drafting Osiris Torrance and signing the depth of Brandon Shell and bringing back guys like Questenberry and having Edwards there, but like
mhm,
they still got to gel, right? And they still have to show that they can kind of get it together in the sense that they weren't necessarily an elite group to begin with,
mhm.
and so you're banking on a like outside of maybe Deion Dawkins and Mitch Morse, you're really banking on sort of like above average play. I don't think you're banking on like elite play. So it's a disappointment. I think more disappointing is the fact that like you're starting to see like these sort of stupid little injuries pop up, like with Deion Dawkins and his finger and things
Mhm.
like not anything threat that he's gonna miss the beginning of the season, but it's just more like annoying type stuff than it is
Yeah.
like anything of major concern for me right now.
And I don't think like in the grand scheme of things, I don't even think I'm that concerned about the interior. I haven't really heard a peep about Connor McGovern, so that's good. That's a good thing. We don't hear about offensive linemen. Haven't really heard a peep about Mitch Morse. Heard nothing but good things about Ryan Bates. The issue, to me, and again, Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown look like they've, improved, or even though they're getting blown by some of this defensive line because they're so good, there have been some good notes and good things that I'm hearing about Spencer Brown and Deion Dawkins. The biggest issue is tackle depth. Like that could
Mhm.
be
Big
what
issue.
really does the Buffalo Bills in this year. David Questenberry, Brandon Shell, Tommy Doyle, like not good reports coming out about the Buffalo Bills and their tackle depth.
No, and this is what I said right before camp started, right? It's still like if something happens to Deion Dawkins and there's like a
Mhm.
domino effect, like this tackle room is not good, right? It's like
Yeah.
overall, it's really not. They had David Questenberry playing at at the one, replacing Deion Dawkins while he was out, and that's not what I want, right? Like, but
Mhm.
that's the reality we're in right now. That's what it's gonna be, and we just have to accept that, and it's not a great situation. Um, I think Tommy Doyle's time is probably run out here with the
Mhm.
Bills.
Yeah, I think he's toast.
I think he's toast. I think Brandon Shell is nice as a backup right
Mhm.
tackle. Obviously, tons of snaps at that position, but like you want Spencer Brown to be that guy. Like he's had a few things come up already with his back. Nothing. reported that it's been major, but like
Mhm.
there's these little, nicks and cuts around this offensive line, especially on the tackle depth. It's like it's concerning. Is definitely a concern, and this is again why people were very much wanting the
Mhm.
Bills to look at that position in the draft, and they did not. Um, Obviously happy with getting Osiris Torrance, but the Bills still really didn't do anything to
Yeah.
address tackle in the offseason long term.
100%, and we'll see if that comes back to bite the Buffalo Bills. All right, on to the Bills versus the Colts, previewing Saturday's preseason game. Obviously, we're not going to go as in depth as we would for a regular season game. We're not going to pull out the superlatives for the preseason, but a lot of interesting storylines. Like number one, it's going to be really fun just to see Anthony Richardson play football.
Yeah,
Like that's going to be really cool to see.
yeah.
It's going to be really cool to see uh, Lil Dirty make his return to Highmark Stadium and come in here to Buffalo and play. And the Colts have some fun players throughout their depth chart as well. Some interesting matchups that could be fun to watch for the Buffalo Bills. So, what are your earliest thoughts here
Mm.
on Bills and Colts? Because I know Sean McDermott in his press conference today was like, no offense to the Indianapolis Colts. I don't care about them. It's more about us in this first preseason game.
Yeah, a bummer, obviously, that Naheem's not going to be able to go play
Yeah.
against his
Well,
old
nor
team
nor Zach
either,
Moss.
nor Zach
Neither
Moss.
guy from
Yeah.
that trade. Yeah.
Um, and this whole cloud around the Colts with the Jonathan Taylor situation is
Mhm.
quite interesting. The Colts, like, for a team that they're kind of forgotten about a lot of
Yeah.
times. They have some like very intriguing storylines going into the season. Obviously, headlined by Jonathan Taylor and his situation, and Anthony Richardson coming in as sort
Mhm.
of like the ceiling quarterback of this year's draft. And by all accounts, like started out a little rough, but the last couple practices playing with the ones and has been sharper per some of the reports I've been reading from
Mhm.
some of the Colts beat as well. So it'll be interesting. I'm excited to see Anthony Richardson play. I think for me, the story of this game becomes like some of these battles that we talked about
Yeah.
earlier. How does the CB2 sort of rotation shake out in this first preseason game? How many reps does a guy like Dalton Kincaid get in the
Mhm.
first preseason game of the year? And things like that. But the Colts, an interesting team. Are they going to challenge for much this year? That remains to be seen. I don't know. I think without Jonathan Taylor, that's going to be a tall order. And let's
Yeah.
not forget about your draft crush there, Evan Hull, maybe
Dude,
going to get a good amount of playing
listen,
time.
listen. Someone said in the comment section too, they were like, who even are the running backs for the Colts? Pops Mafia said, you're gonna get a heavy dose of Evan Hull in this game, and you're gonna get a heavy dose of my boy from 2 years ago, the University of Maryland, Jake Funk, as well. So you got Evan Hall, you got Jake Funk, the rare white running back too. So you're gonna get a heavy dose of those two in this game, and you'll probably see a lot of Deion Jackson. They just picked up Kenyon Drake as well, but I'll tell you what, when I think about this game, and again, I have no idea if the Colts are playing their starters or not, but their starting defensive line for the Colts: Kwity Paye, Grover Stewart, DeForest Buckner, Samson Eggbom. That's a pretty good starting defensive line. Their depth isn't the greatest, but that's a pretty darn good starting defensive line. If those guys play even a series or two, and our starting offensive line plays even a series or two, that's where
Mhm.
my focus is going to be. How
Yep.
does the Buffalo Bills number one offensive line hold up against another team's number one defensive line if, again, the football gods allow that to happen on Saturday? Because I just want to see the starting offensive line against competition that isn't the Buffalo Bills defensive line.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? We want to see them beat up on well, each
Mhm.
line, right? We want to see them beat up
Yeah.
on opponents finally. And so um I think for me, you hit it on the head. The offensive line is kind of probably where I'm going to be spending most of my
Mhm.
focus on this game, right? And it'll be interesting to see like how much run does a guy like Ryan Bates get in this game, right? I mean, he's going to start. Are they going to give Cyrus Torrance a chance to start at right guard and kind of protect Ryan Bates? Um, Probably not going to do that, but like it
Mhm.
wouldn't be surprise me if Ryan Bates is only in there for like one series and then he's out. So the Bills really need to kind of protect, I think, some of these guys in this
Mhm.
first game. especially because obviously we don't expect any of the major studs to be
Mhm.
playing, if at all, right? I mean, that's kind of the question is like, are some of these guys not going to play at all? Is going to be I with Deion Dawkins'
Mhm.
injury to his finger, I wouldn't expect to see him in this game. I
Yeah.
mean, that's just me personally. I wouldn't expect to see him.
And a little bit of deja vu here because the Buffalo Bills played the Colts last preseason. I believe they played them at Highmark Stadium too as well. And last year we had the same conversation, and I mentioned the same exact matchups. Last year when the Bills were playing the Colts in the preseason, I was saying, "Oh, the Colts have some good tight end depth, especially Jelani Woods, who they just drafted." I
Right.
was like, I want to see Terrell Bernard, in coverage against Jelani Woods. You look at the Colts depth chart: Jelani Woods, Mo Alley Cox. They drafted Mallory. They got Kylan Granson. They got Drew Ogletree, Farrell Brown. I like the tight end depth that the Indianapolis Colts possess. So
Hmm.
it's going to be really interesting to see him or to see them, excuse me, matched up against Tyrell Dodson in coverage, Terrell Bernard in coverage. When Dorian Williams gets out there, Dorian Williams in coverage, Balon Spector in coverage. So the linebackers not named Matt Milano in coverage against some of these tight ends, or maybe the Buffalo Bills utilize Saran Neal, Taylor Rapp on these tight ends a little bit. That'll be something that'll be interesting to see as well in a matchup that I'll be looking for.
Be nice to see Saran Neal, get some positive defensive plays under his belt. That would be nice. I mean, obviously, I've been, probably as a show, we've been hard on Saran Neal's defensive prowess, rightfully so,
Mhm.
right? So let's see really if he can translate that good camp into real action. AK Cash here with the super chat. Thank you very much for that, AK. What number percentage of snaps does Spencer Brown get this preseason?
I wouldn't be surprised if he works in with first and second team and he gets more maybe snaps than like the starting unit would, just because, he didn't get a lot of repetitions last offseason. And the Buffalo Bills probably want to see if what happens in training camp carries over into the game like setting. So I wouldn't be surprised if I don't know if I want to put a percentage on it because that's just really difficult. But I would say I feel confident that like Spencer Brown's the kind of guy where you're going to see him still on the field when the other four guys come off.
Yeah. I mean, and he needs the reps, right? We know about
Mhm.
how he missed most of camp last year. We know about he's been such a I mean, would you call him a polarizing figure in Bill's Mafia? I mean, he probably is, right? Because there's a lot of people who like give him a chance. There's a lot of people who don't want to give him a
Mhm.
chance and wanted the Bills to address that position in a more impactful way, either through the draft and free agency. So a lot of,
Yeah.
he's under the microscope this year, Spencer Brown. So more reps for him in the preseason, the better. Obviously, there's always the risk of injury, no matter
Mhm.
how many reps you get. But like, yeah, I'd give him more reps. I agree with you.
Last matchup I want to highlight here, and again, 95% of these things probably won't even happen because who knows who's playing in this game. But I want to see some Alec Pierce versus Kyrie Elam. I think that could be a fun little one-on-one. The Buffalo Bills first round draft pick last year against the Colts second round draft pick last year, and Alec Pierce, a bigger body wide receiver who's got some speed to get down the field. That could be an interesting matchup to keep an eye out for.
Well, I mean, you, I, I
I'm
would.
grasping at straws here.
Well, I look. This is what we do as Bills fans, and this is
Yeah.
like why being a Bills fan is so great, and why the comment section so great is like we can find these matchups and get excited about them in the first
Mhm.
preseason game, and have a like a real conversation about what we feel about it. So look, I don't think you're grasping at straws. I think it's a real matchup to
Yeah.
look out for, and I think that look,
I
it's
mean,
preseason week 1, right?
yeah.
There's not gonna be a lot of studs on the field, right? So why not look for
Listen,
some of these things?
how dare you say there's not gonna be a lot of studs on the field? Because I have the Colts depth chart pulled up on our lads, and I'm looking for all my favorite uh Michael Strawn from back in the
Yep.
day. Remember I interviewed him back at Fanatics?
Yes, I
Said he's
do
gonna be the next
remember that.
Calvin Johnson. I'm waiting for
Yes.
that breakout. We got Amari Rogers. We loved him a
Mhm.
couple of years ago. He flamed out in Green Bay. He's now a depth
Yes.
receiver for the Colts.
Yep.
Josh Downs, who we loved in the pre-draft process. He's a guy to keep an eye out for.
Alec
Um,
Pierce. Is he going to play much?
Alec Pierce, is he going to play much? We liked Will Mallory, the tight end. Evan Hall, Jake Funk are going to get some playing time. Taven Bryan has been a guy that I've loved for years. I wanted the Buffalo Bills to pursue him this offseason. They got Poona Ford, way better, way bigger of an upgrade. Jojo Doman is a guy that we liked in the pre-draft process a couple of years ago. Julius Bretz is a guy we loved in the pre-draft process. Julian Blackman, Darius Rush. So there's a lot of people that we talk about in the pre-draft process. We get to watch them in the preseason, and that's why I love the preseason. We get to watch all of our draft crushes go out there. But hopefully for 1 week they all suck and the Buffalo Bills win this game like 48-0.
Yeah, and even if that's not the case, it doesn't matter, right? So even you can root for these guys and not feel too guilty about it. You don't have to feel too guilty about it. As Dirty Jersey mentions, and we had mentioned McKenzie. What I wonder how much he's going to play. The Colts actually surprisingly have a pretty deep wide receiver room. And Michael Pittman's being maybe forgotten a bit this year. Obviously, a lot's going to depend on Anthony Richardson, kind of how he plays out. But Michael Pittman,
they'll be rolling out Rashad Perryman in the third quarter, and he's a veteran.
Exactly.
It'll be.
I'm just saying for the season. Michael Pittman,
okay,
He could be
nice.
He could
and
be
Michael
nice.
Strawn next Calvin Johnson. He said it. So he said it. All right. Let's close out the show now by going around the NFL. We'll make this sort of like a rapid fire segment. And Dave, you can throw some things out here if you have some things around the league you want to talk about. I want to start with the breaking news. Right before we came on, Skip Bayless has a new co-host on Undisputed. Did you see this?
I did not know.
During football season and football season only, Richard Sherman will be going toe-to-toe with Skip Bayless on Fox Sports' Undisputed. Is Skip Bayless going to survive football season? I think Richard Sherman may murder him.
I think he will. And look, Shannon Sharp, I think probably honestly went a little easy on Skip during the run.
He did.
Right? I mean, I think Richard Sherman for me was a guy during his playing days, I probably didn't like him as much as I like him now. I do like Richard Sherman. I think he's really knowledgeable. I think he was one of the best guys they had on those Thursday night. One of the best guys they had on that Thursday night. Amazon Prime lineup they had. And so it's nice to see Richard Sherman get a chance. He knows football obviously really well. He's very eloquent. And I think that he would be the type to not back down from Skip Bayless. So, look, the producers are probably making a smart decision here because that's going to get a lot of eyeballs, I think, come football season. So, they're going to get ratings, and it's going to be a very interesting dynamic to see how much. It'll be interesting to see if Skip backs down at all. He's not the type to really do that, but will he change a little bit going up against a guy and debating against Richard Sherman? Should be interesting.
Next topic from our Around the League segment here. The Hall of Fame game on Thursday averaged 6.3 million viewers. That is a higher average rating than the entirety of the NBA playoffs. Football, specifically the NFL, is king.
NFL is king. When you have things like the combine we've talked about and the ratings like the NFL draft get, and then you even have some of these other minor things like training camp gets more eyeballs probably on it than some of these other things as well. People love the NFL. It's not going away. Sunday Ticket being on YouTube TV this year, I think is going to be great. I think you'll get even more people with access to watch the NFL than you have in the past, because I think the access to Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV is going to be easier for people. Obviously, it's already kind of an app and a streaming option. So just adding that to the mix, I think you're going to get a ton more people even still watching the game. So NFL is king. Bills finally, going to have a quote home game in the international series this year. So, and not to mention all the people that just love the fantasy and gambling aspect of it. So, man, it's just crazy how much the NFL just dominates the other sort of big three American sports.
Justin Houston to the Carolina Panthers, Yannick Ngakoue to the Chicago Bears. Obviously, the Buffalo Bills added their pass rusher in Leonard Floyd, but it's good to see these other two pass rushers on the market go to NFC teams that are not on our schedule.
Going to NFC teams, and then obviously you go back to like DeAndre Hopkins hitting him going to the Titans, obviously an AFC team, but not the Chiefs and not a powerhouse necessarily. So nice to see these guys get their gigs, and like I'm sure that waiting game is tough, but probably maybe not as tough for guys like that who've already kind of made a lot of money in the league and have kind of been through the rigors of going through each summer and OTAs and camps. So I'm sure ultimately a good situation for those guys where they ended up in, yes, a waiting game, but good to see them sort of still get their due and being recognized that they could still play at this level.
Dalvin Cook still on the market. Again, apparently negotiations with the Jets have broken down. Can't agree over a role. That kind of hurts because maybe now it sort of tips the cap there, hints that Breece Hall is healthy and ready to go. Ezekiel Elliott circling around, possibly landing in New England, but those two don't have a home yet. But Teddy Bridgewater does go into the Detroit Lions, which leaves Carson Wentz, Nick Foles, Joe Flacco as the top quarterbacks remaining in free agency. So the Buffalo Bills appear set at backup quarterback. And then the last two signings I wanted to mention here today, Myles Jack and Zach Cunningham to the Philadelphia Eagles. Both you and I were low on these guys during our free agency shows, but it's just like Philadelphia to sign these guys and want them to pop, correct? The Buffalo Bills going to regret not signing one of these guys?
I mean, it's going to be hard to say, right? Because though going to a situation like Philadelphia where they obviously dominated defensively last year, especially from the sack perspective, we know how much they kind of leveraged the linebackers in that regard. It's a good situation for them to go into. And I think it's a low risk, obviously high reward type of move. Those are the kind of moves you are looking for. Obviously this late into the game, into training camp, the Bills making some of those moves themselves, obviously, right, this year with guys like Taylor Rapp and Leonard Floyd, not signing them immediately in free agency, obviously earlier than them, but linebacker still a concern for the Bills. So regret, I don't know. We'll see. Different situations. It's hard to know whether it would translate, but savvy moves, of course, by the Eagles, and they've been making really savvy moves for the last couple years.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that will just about do it for this evening. Before we head out, again, the weekly challenge for you. When this live stream ends, or if you're listening on demand, go to the comment section of this video or the comments of this video and let us know who your biggest camp standouts are or who your biggest camp disappointments are if you want to get that off your chest. But leave us a comment on this show after the live stream has concluded. It's the number one way you can help us because it really helps us boost the algorithm, get our show seen and viewed by more people. So if you're looking to support us, you can do that. And if you're looking to support Cover One in general, the number one way to go is the Cover One Pass exclusive members only content, access to our Slack channel. You get free, not free because you're paying $57 a year, but it's well worth it. You're getting some swag to go along with it. We got a new Cover One Insider t-shirt this year, a decal, and a whole bunch of other things that come with the Cover One Pass. So head on over to cover1.football and you can sign up for your Cover One Pass club access. Dave, any final thoughts before we head out of here this evening? And Roy Collins comes in and says Alex Magoo, backup quarterback. He's signing Green Bay, so he might get cut, but he's signing Green Bay.
No, I think gonna be nice. I think the next practice is Wednesday. I think the Bills are off tomorrow, so next practice Wednesday. Obviously, leading into Saturday's game against the Colts. Really excited. Chris Kepner and I will be on the golf course during the game, unfortunately, but we will be watching it. Chris is driving through on his way to Myrtle Beach to do a family thing, and he's stopping by the old Cary, North Carolina to play around a golf.
That's awesome.
We'll have it on though in the cart, so No worries
That
about that.
that is a dream day right there. All
Yes.
right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much as always. The comment section, you guys are incredible. You make this show what it is. I say this every week. If it wasn't for you guys, this show would have been over 35, 40 minutes ago because me and Dave would have been able to get all that stuff off of our chest. You guys really do add so much to the conversation, and we appreciate you guys. And until next time, Dave, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comment section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!